On the Spot with Michelle Makori is brought to you by Prime XBT.
And we are back with Florian Grummes, Managing Director of Midas Touch Consulting. Florian, before the break, we were focusing very heavily on gold and your outlook there. Let's now shift our attention to digital gold, to Bitcoin, and get your thoughts there. Bitcoin has rallied since mid-June when BlackRock unveiled plans for an ETF that will hold actual Bitcoin. Bitcoin pushing up to 30,000 and it's above that, hitting 31,000 today. Now, the last time we spoke, Florian, you were rather bearish on Bitcoin. Granted, it was in the depth of crypto winter, but you said that if Bitcoin broke below 18,000, that it could in fact go to 10,000 and then to 6,000. Now, Bitcoin was trading in the 18 to 20,000 range at the time. This was in October of last year. Are you surprised by this tremendous rally we've seen since then?
Right. And remember, I think there was all the reason to be bearish because after we met, and it was not particularly because of us, but after we met, all hell broke loose in the markets and FTX went belly up and all the scam basically came to the surface. And it was a very challenging, I think, 1.5 months after our interview. And Bitcoin came down quite a lot, but you're right. It was actually surprising how strong it held up in the end of the day. And so by early December, I realized that even though we had a lot of negative news, Bitcoin basically refused to go lower. So that's a good initial signal that tells you, okay, the market is doing something else, and I have to readjust my perception or my take on the market, right? And that's what I did. And in early January, I came out with a very bullish piece stating that I think that Bitcoin had bottomed out and that I was expecting a recovery to 25 and 30K, and then also later that year to 45 and 50K. So the first two targets have been met. And now Bitcoin is trying to break out above this 31K kind of resistance.
Right.
Doesn't look too bad. We had the Bitcoin ETF.
Right.
That brought a lot of new fantasy into the sector. And yes, the decision has been kind of neglected, or they have to bring up more evidence or a better basically documentation of what they want to do. But in the end of the day, this fantasy is still alive. And I
so
think
is it fantasy or is it reality then? Because as you quite rightly said, Bitcoin and other crypto tokens have surged since mid-June when BlackRock unveiled plans for that spot ETF. Bitcoin was up about 20% since that BlackRock announcement, breaking above 30,000, as you just mentioned. Then we got reports that it may not be such a smooth ride for that ETF to go through. There are reports that the Securities and Exchange Commission is saying that the recent wave of applications filed by managers like BlackRock, like Vanguard, like WisdomTree are inadequate. Wall Street Journal reporting this. And we now have learned that BlackRock has refiled the Bitcoin ETF. It's been refiled, naming Coinbase as a surveillance sharing partner. And that followed that report that I mentioned that the SEC deemed that the earlier proposals were inadequate because they didn't specify the name of the underlying market in so-called surveillance sharing agreements. So now they're all coming out and putting Coinbase there, which is a whole other conversation about what it means for Coinbase. But before we get to that, you call this a fantasy. BlackRock has a very, very, very good success rate of filing for ETFs and getting them. I think it's 500 to 1. I think they've only missed one that they filed, and that's why the market was rallying on this, thinking, well, if BlackRock is doing this, they must know something. What do you think is the chance that this BlackRock ETF will get approved, the spot ETF?
I think ultimately they will get approval. We just don't know how long it will take, right? And I remember when something a little bit similar happened with gold and the gold ETFs. It also took quite a while until finally a gold ETF was available. But over this 1 or 2 years before the announcement and when this whole process got started, the market also started to price in future demand coming into the market through those ETFs. And I think that's what I said or meant with framing it fantasy, because it's still not clear. It's still not a given fact. But I think you can definitely anticipate a lot of institutional buying and a lot of retail buying coming into this market if there is a Bitcoin ETF, right?
So if this gets delayed, right? If this process for the application from BlackRock for that spot ETF gets delayed, before it gets outright ruled out, which is usually how the process works, right? What would be the initial reaction if it doesn't look like an approval is imminent?
Well, if it doesn't look like, then you will certainly get a sell-off, right? So that's why.
I mean, my point is that we've had several ETFs rejected before, right? But one's getting the sense that this time it's different because it's BlackRock. If there is a delay, perhaps not a definitive decision, but like a delay, like we've seen now, reports saying that it's inadequate, revise your filing. Do you see that having an impact?
No, I mean, that's exactly where we are right now. It's still unclear, but there is still reason to have the hope or the fantasy that this will come. And so, and that could drag Bitcoin on towards 40K, 45K, even 49K, which was my price target for this bounce or echo rally since the bear market that we had last year.
Okay, so as long as the fantasy is alive, as long as people think that it can happen, you're saying that in itself could be enough to pull Bitcoin up to what, 49K?
Yeah, 49K would be my target.
And if it does get approved, then what? What's your outlook then?
Because you get to sell the news event. So the market is pricing in that potential yes over a period of time. And then once it's finally is out in the news, then it's time to take profits, because everybody who bought along the way to basically be positioned for that event then needs to take profit, right? I mean, markets are counterintuitive, you know. I mean, they don't necessarily always make sense, and that is a typical example. Like you would think, wow, it's a good news coming to the market, and the market is selling off because everybody has been positioning themselves
right
for this event, and they take profits once the news is coming out.
Buy the rumor, sell the news, as they say. So, exactly. But this could also coincide with a halving, which is expected to take place in around April next year. Right. How does this play in? What would you say is your Bitcoin price outlook then for the end of 2023? And perhaps I'm going to push it a little bit further for the, say, first quarter of 2024, if you have those.
Look, I thought that as an answer to the bear market that took Bitcoin from 69,000 down to 15,000, there was a very good probability that you get a bounce from this very oversold setup in late December, early January, and that would take Bitcoin back to roughly saying $50,000. So that's basically a retracement level, similar retracement we saw in the last bear market. So that was very simply framed my thinking. And after that, I would assume that Bitcoin should pull back maybe to 25,000, 30,000 again. And then, of course, the halving will change everything. And together with the potentially approved Bitcoin ETF, it would definitely drastically change everything. And then $100,000 in the next year, or maybe it would be next year, is very likely. And down the road, if you really get a Bitcoin ETF and they're really buying the one Bitcoin that we are talking about, because as you know, in the prospectus, they already said that they can decide which is the real Bitcoin. So there can be a lot of surprises down the road. But if they do, yes, I think this can easily go to 100K.
Wait, let's revisit that point. What do you mean by we don't know which Bitcoin they will be buying? Are you referring to?
As you know, that the blockchain has been forked quite a few times already.
Yeah.
There's scams. Some basically claim or say that they have the better version or the real version of Bitcoin, or the other one is better in terms of scaling, whatever. I mean, it's an ongoing discussion for many, many years. That's why we have different versions. And to be on the safe side, obviously, BlackRock and some of the others, they basically put a note in their prospectus that they want to be able to decide which of the Bitcoin chains they actually really then want to use for their ETF. So it could be that at some point they decide, no, it's not the original Bitcoin, but we go for Bitcoin Satoshi Vision, or we go for Bitcoin Cash or whatever. So there's this tricky, and I think people need to also be aware that yes, it will have a positive effect, but it will also have a negative effect at some point. And let me remind you of the gold market. After all this gold ETF buying had been done, the gold ETFs were responsible to push gold down from 2011 to 2015 by 50%. Suddenly, a lot of gold came to the market because you suddenly could sell it with one mouse click, where otherwise you would have had to carry your coins and bars to a dealer. Suddenly, you were able to trade much faster, and this changed the gold market a lot. So I think something similar is possible for Bitcoin, obviously in a different way, but then again, just be aware that it's not only positive that Bitcoin ETF is coming.
Right. And yeah, the idea of a potential fork in Bitcoin has been floated, that it could be forced, and that may in fact be part of a big conspiracy theory, that could be the idea behind why BlackRock has taken an interest in Bitcoin. And yeah, that is a whole other conversation about the potential there. But it is very curious. It is very curious that we do have that language in that ETF filing, which we have spoken about with other guests. It is definitely curious language, especially considering that we're talking about BlackRock, which is a big proponent of ESG, and that's why it's causing some concern that it could give potentially too much power over the Bitcoin world, especially when you look at this particular line here that you've now referenced in that Bitcoin ETF, where it states that should Bitcoin experience a hard fork that is an agreed upon change to its underlying code, BlackRock will use its discretion to determine which version of Bitcoin is the appropriate network for the trust's purposes. So yeah, it's very interesting that this is in the filing. That language about a hard fork is in the filing, and the fear among Bitcoin investors is that BlackRock may push for a hard fork of Bitcoin, which would transform the coin from a proof of work to a proof of stake, which is deemed to be more environmentally friendly. And this would obviously compromise Bitcoin's democratic and decentralized vision. And of course, BlackRock would at first need to get control of the miners in order to do this, to be more influential over the mining infrastructure, because they're the ones that ultimately would be making those decisions. But it's interesting that you flag that as well, Florian, because that has raised some eyebrows why that particular language is in the ETF. But before we fully wade into the conspiracy world there, do you think that is something that people should be concerned about, seeing as you have brought it up?
Yeah, I just wanted to mention it. I mean, we will have to see how it plays out. But again, remember that the gold ETFs were not only bringing glory and happiness to the gold market. So they changed some things quite significantly. And something similar could happen with the Bitcoin ETF as well down the road. And again, I mean, I'm not a fan of ETFs at all. I understand that for a retail investor, it's an easy way to invest in different sectors and actually diversify. It's great, but I personally prefer direct ownership of stocks. I also want to directly receive the dividends. I want to have the rights to vote, etc., etc. And in all these kind of things, you basically give up in an ETF structure. So, I mean, BlackRock and Vanguard are the most dominant players on the planet nowadays because they basically manage so much money in ETFs. Right. So,
Florian, I'm with you. I've always said that this may not be such a good thing, especially when you start to have derivative synthetic product. It allows for more manipulation. It, on one level or another, compromises the integrity of the core asset, and that this may in fact be counter to the mission of Bitcoin to be a truly decentralized currency for the people. And that it may challenge the whole ideological argument for having Bitcoin there. But we're focusing on the price for right now. And you're saying just the news will get Bitcoin, or the rumors could get Bitcoin up to 49,000 by what time period?
Yeah, over the next, let's say, 6 months.
Okay.
Maybe faster. Let's see.
Okay. Then you anticipate a bit of a dip if it does get confirmed, but then a long-term rally that could see Bitcoin to $100,000, you said, by the end of 2024, if that's an accurate recap?
Yeah. I think like once the halving is done in about a year, well, in 10 months already, right? But
Okay.
yes, I think then we should be in a really new bull market, and then all it takes is Bitcoin to break out above those 65 to 69,000 resistance zone, and then it can actually happen rather quickly.
I don't know if you weigh in on this, Florian, but because Coinbase has been listed as the custodian for BlackRock's funds holdings as well as others, we have seen shares in Coinbase soar around 30% over the same time period. Is that something you're looking at? Is that a potential opportunity here?
Well, I mean, generally speaking, blockchain stocks are also an opportunity, and maybe sometimes even the better way to profit instead of buying some of these weird and freaky kind of coins and tokens, right? Especially for the ones who don't really know how to do it. But you have to be, again, very careful because this is an extremely volatile sector. But I mean, Coinbase certainly is one of the very big so-called conservative stocks that you could pick in the sector, right? I mean, everything else is much more speculative, I guess.
Okay, Florian, as we wrap up here, last year you said that gold would be the top performing asset of 2022. Broadly speaking, you were correct. It did beat the S&P 500. It declined 18.11%. Gold posted a decline of 0.28%. Bitcoin lost around 65% in 2022. So yeah, gold was, in the broader sector of asset classes, the top performing asset or asset class. What do you think is going to be this year's top performing asset or asset class?
Well, I mean, we are in early July now, and it's probably this decision is already done because Bitcoin is up more than 80% from year to date. While as you said, I mean, gold now is I think 3, 4, 5% or something up. So it most likely will be Bitcoin by the end of the year, no matter what happens over the next 5 months.
Just because it's had that record so far, you're thinking that Bitcoin would be
it has been outperforming gold, we have to be honest. I mean, it has been outperforming gold by a factor of 10 to 15 over the last few months. So Bitcoin would have to crash dramatically to basically give back all those gains, and then gold would have to rally strongly to take over.
Okay. So, and you don't see that happening.
Bitcoin will be the winner of the year already, yes.
Bitcoin will most likely be the top performing asset of 2023. Yep, certainly it has set the stage for that. Florian, any final thoughts?
Well, I think for me it was important to point out the opportunity in the gold market. I just said that best performer of the year will be most likely Bitcoin, simply because it's already up 80%. But over the next few months, I really see a very good opportunity in the gold market. And in the longer run, I strongly and continue to believe that you need to diversify yourself into physical, analog, old school, old-fashioned gold and silver, as well as decentralized assets. And Bitcoin is so far the best decentralized asset that we know of. And I think they both complement each other very beautifully. So and you need to have a protection because I see massive more money printing coming down the road over the next few years.
Right. And last time we also touched on your big concern about central bank digital currencies, or a form of digital slavery, as you put it. We're going to have you back for that conversation. We're out of time for today. But Florian, thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. Always a pleasure. Thanks.
Oh, All right, Florian Grummes, thank you. And as always, thank you for watching. A big thank you to our sponsors, Prime XBT. A reminder for Kitco viewers, there is a special offer for you on Prime XBT. Check it out in the description of this video. I'm 𝗫𝗿𝗺𝗲. I'll see you next time.
Begin your path to financial freedom. Gain up to a $7,000 bonus on us. Register and use promo code. Deposit and enjoy a 7% bonus. Available now. Link in the description.